When I think of fort, especially frontier fort, I think of wooden stockade, but I don't see wood here. Why is that the case?
When you watch the old Hollywood movies, that's one of the questions that people come in asking, especially people from European countries, the French, the German, the English. They all watch these old Hollywood movies and they think every fort like that had that stockade. So that's one of the first questions that they ask. But that did a lot to perpetuate that myth of all of these forts having that stockade around it. So yes, some of them did at an earlier time period in different locations, but those in the Texas frontier and some of these western territories and states, they were just open. There was enough firepower here to really deter any groups from coming in and attacking a fort like this. So number one, there really wasn't a major need for it. Number two, the military didn't want to have to spend money on a stockade around, maybe a 50, 60 acre site, depending on the size of the fort. And then if you really think about the region, sometimes you were lucky to get enough wood to build the structures and or put shingles on. You may have to get that stuff shipped in. So there wasn't a lot of wood available for something like that. So the original flagpole was similar in that design, except that the original one had the guy wires that were coming down and would hold up the flag, would stabilize the flagpole. We don't have that today, but it is similar in design. Fort Concho would fly two different flags. They would fly the 37 and the 38 star flag. It would just depend on time period, of course, with the 38th state coming in, 1876, 77, as to what flag would fly. Today we fly a 38 star predominantly. This pretty much reflects a time period of about 1885 to the end of the fort's time period. And this is one of my projects, trying to get the right equipment in here and some of the furnishings and stuff in here that reflect that time period. The color is correct. They had that green, that Paris green, that emerald green that they put on there. You had your foot locker at the foot of the bed, of course. You had some sort of gear rack. The men would have just that area to themselves. That was it. The equipment also reflects that 1880s time period with the blanket bag generally on top, a canteen, and a haversack. You would have different types of belts, you would have your different clothing, you would have your personal items. That was your area. $13 a month is what they started out being paid as, which really doesn't sound like a lot, but for that time period, that's not bad wages considering. There were many that had no skills, abilities to do other types of jobs. There were slaves, sons of former slaves, that were now allowed into the military, in the professional military. They would come out here. This was a job and an opportunity for them, and it was one of the few opportunities in American society where a black man and a white man made the same amount of money doing the same exact job. They hated the job, but they made the same amount of money doing it. Starting out, the thought behind it was one lady's vision of having her museum placed in these old historic buildings. Miss Ginevra Carson had a museum in the original courthouse, and this was in the 1920s. Well, she knew about the history of Fort Concho, as most people did of the time period, and it was a good idea of hers to come over here to bring her West Texas Museum and put it into some of these old buildings. So 2 for 1, you could have the museum plus start preserving these old fort buildings. So it was from her vision of preservation and or starting up this larger museum that she was able to purchase the headquarters building. Eventually it became Fort Concho Museum. And then piece by piece, knowing and figuring out which buildings were part of the old fort, and as they became available, she was able to come in and purchase these structures. And then when she passed, others would take up the torch, so to speak, to come down to what we're doing today.